Go ahead, Claire.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week of the Canadian Nurses Association webinar series dubbed Coffee with Claire. This one being my last conversation with you as the Canadian Nurses Association president. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, my name is Claire Betker, and I'm the president of the Canadian Nurses Association, and I'm a longstanding registered nurse from Manitoba. I'm speaking to you from my home in Winnipeg, where I have the privilege of working remotely as the scientific director for the National Collaborating Centre for Determinants of Health, which is hosted by the St. FX University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. I'd like to begin this conversation by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This is our 10th conversation, started as COVID-19 pandemic was declared, I think, about 14 weeks ago. This is our 10th. We instigated the conversations because we were being asked questions by media and by others. What are nurses thinking? What are nurses saying out there? And so as a way to connect, one of many ways that we use to connect, we instigated these Coffee with Claire. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Tim Guest, who's the Canadian Nurses Association president-elect. He's in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he is the president-elect for 3 more days. So Tim, do you want to just say hello and give a wave?
Good afternoon, Claire. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you here in Halifax from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral home and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I've watched the first 9 sessions, and I've really enjoyed them. I thought they were really good. So I have to say that I'm a little anxious with this one. It's a little different being on this side of the turned off camera. So, but glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tim. And we're going into our board of directors meetings tomorrow, and then on Monday is our very abridged, actually, annual general meeting of the Canadian Nurses Association, at which our president-elect will be elected. And Sylvain Brosseau and Cynthia Bryaton are nominated and candidates for that. So that election will occur on Monday. There will be opportunity during this conversation between Tim and I for you to participate, and I'd like to start by asking you to use the chat box. Many of you are already in there, identifying yourself, saying who you are and where you're from. If you do it to panelists, all panelists and all attendees, we can actually have somewhat of a conversation between us. So we're going to ask you for some feedback, ask you for some suggestions in the chat box, and there'll also be an opportunity. You can find that by hovering your cursor at the bottom of the screen where it says chat. You can also use the Q&A to ask a question so it doesn't get lost in the chat. You can actually use that space to ask a question, and we will be taking questions along the way. So please introduce yourself. We had a lot of people register for this session, and so we're really happy with that turnout. So just to the discussion, I just want to make sure that you know that the discussion will be in English. However, we are joined by Josette Roussel, who's the executive advisor of the Canadian Nurses Association, who will be able to answer questions in French or help us with translation. So I'd just like to turn it over to Josette to say a few words, and I'd like to encourage participants to use the language they feel most comfortable with. Josette?
Merci Claire et bonjour à tout le monde. Je vous encourage à demander vos questions en français aux francophones. qui participent au webinaire et je ferai la traduction simultanée. Alors, bienvenue à tous et à toutes et bon webinaire. Over to you, Claire and Tim.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Josette, for being there. And the other staff from the Canadian Nurses Association is Elizabeth Morin. She's here. She's just an absolute pro at Zoom and facilitating these kinds of conversations. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here and helping us with any technical issues, for which you can use the chat box as well. So this session, as you can see on the slide there, is titled Your Voice, Your Association. And that was actually how we perceived and conceived and went about conducting what we called our engagement and dialogue sessions on behalf of the Board of Directors and with full collaboration of the Board and Directors. So the next slide shows us the outline for what we want to talk about today. And we have an hour. In the other 9 Coffees with Claire, we've only had 45 minutes. So we extended by about 15 minutes because that 45 minutes went by so fast. So we want to share the findings. We want to share some of the new brand work or branding work. And what we understand is branding is a process that goes on for a while. So who we talked to, what we heard from those folks that so generously shared their time with us, share a little bit about the CNA brand, our commitment and what we see as our next steps, which includes launching a survey. One of the things that we heard in those sessions was survey more people, engage more of the regulated nurses across Canada. So we'll talk about that survey in a minute. But before we get going, we thought we'd actually engage you in a couple of polls. So Elizabeth, just before we go to the first slide, could you just put up that first poll there, please? So we're just wondering how many of you online actually had the opportunity to attend one of the Board of Directors engagement sessions, and there were close to 50 of them that we held between October and March of 1920. So while we're waiting for you there to vote, yesterday on my Facebook page, there was a lot of marking of the anniversary, and I see Barb Shellyan is online with us. Hi, Barb, in Alberta, Canmore, Alberta. And why we moved into the branding and the governance review and all of the things that we've been very focused on over the last 2 years is because 2 years ago yesterday, the Canadian Nurses Association at our assembly, at our annual general meeting, had an almost unanimous vote to open our membership from just registered nurses to include all regulated nurses, all categories of regulated nurses in Canada. And that would include licensed practical nurses or registered practical nurses as they're known in Ontario, registered psychiatric nurses, registered nurses, and nurse practitioners. So part of our goal in this engagement and these engagement sessions was really to reach out and to hear the voices of all categories of nurses. So it's interesting here, Tim, about 70% of the folks online did not have that opportunity. So I would encourage you to access the survey later, and but a good 30% of you actually were there. So welcome and thanks for attending those sessions across the country. Okay, so the next slide then, please. So I just wanted to highlight the engagement, and as I just mentioned, we held close to 50 sessions. Some had one person in them, because that's who could attend and that's who was there, all the way up to more than 200 in a couple of sessions. We used in-person for the most part, and we augmented it with virtual capacity, really not thinking about Zoom at that time. We used other platforms, teleconference and other platforms. We talked to more than 900, it was actually close to 1,000 nurses from across Canada, coast to coast to coast. All 4 categories of regulated nurses were represented in those sessions across Canada. We talked to nurses from all 13 provinces and territories, and we felt very honored to be able to do that. Nurses that attended the sessions came from all 5 domains of nursing, and really from a very, very broad range of practice sessions and from roles within, or practice settings, I'm sorry, and roles from within those organizations. We made a point of reaching out and speaking to the national nursing groups, and they offered some incredible wisdom and some incredible feedback on the brand and on the governance and on our way forward. So the Canadian Federation of Nursing Unions, the Canadian, the Canadian Nurses Protective Society, sorry, I'm losing my words with the acronyms, the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing, the Canadian Indigenous Nurses Association, the Canadian Nurses Students Association, and many, many of the more than 40 organizations and associations that make up the Canadian network of nursing specialties. We think we actually spoke to well over a half of those 40 groups. So I think we have another polling question, Elizabeth. So one of the things that we asked while we were out there is what people valued from being a member of their national professional association. Obviously, people felt it was very, very valuable to come to those sessions. They were enthusiastic while they were there, and Tim's going to share some of those findings. So we'd like to know from you, just generally, what do you value from being a member of a national professional nursing association? And you can tick off those things there. And while we're waiting for you to answer here, I'll just ask Elizabeth to move the slide to the next one. Thank you there, Elizabeth, to the next slide. And note the one that says general findings. But in the photos, I just kind of wanted to mention where we were. One of them is we were in Kahnawake in Quebec. That was a really excellent opportunity to speak to nurses there. We were in St. John, Newfoundland. That was in the long picture, the big, large auditorium there. And the other one, these photos reflect us in Quebec. Also in Alberta, and also in a personal care home, Dundas Manor, actually in just outside of Ottawa. So these are just a few of the places that we were. So here are, and I'm gonna I think these are really interesting findings. So what people value, or what we heard out there too, was that valuing of the advocacy work, and 80% of you almost are reflecting that. Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you to put the results down for a minute, and then we're going to talk to the general findings, and then I think we'll pull those poll findings because those are really interesting. So Tim, you were with me, and I was with you on most of these sessions, whether one of us was virtually and one of us was in person. So I'm just going to ask you to speak to these general findings here on this slide.
Thanks, Claire. It certainly was an interesting experience as we went across the country, and Claire and I had quite a lot of opportunity to talk about what we heard. There was a fair amount of time between sessions that we had together that we wouldn't have otherwise, and there was 3 major things that really resonated with me that we heard no matter where we were. And the first one was that individuals were a little bit confused about the differentiation between the roles of the regulators, the professional associations, and the unions. Less so with the unions. Linda's on today, and certainly she and her colleagues across the country are doing a pretty good job of making sure their members know what it is that they do for them. But certainly there was confusion between the other two. The next thing that we thought was really quite interesting was there were quite a few people who actually didn't know they were members of the association, and there equally so were individuals that came to the sessions that thought they were members but actually weren't. And we thought that it was really quite interesting with that phenomenon. And the last thing I would say were of the kind of the top things that surprised me were individuals had a hard time articulating what we as CNA do and do for them. And certainly we had a lot of dialogue about that with them. And there were some specific things that I want to comment about that we heard. We heard that nurses across Canada want a strong CNA. We heard that nurses across Canada want a CNA that speaks in a strong and powerful way. We heard that crystal clear. We heard that you want a CNA that welcomes and advocates and provides services for all categories of members. The practical nurses, the registered psychiatric nurses, nurse practitioners, and registered nurses. It was crystal clear everywhere we went that individuals want the organization to meaningfully listen to them and make them welcome. We heard that people want to feel connected, and they want to have the ability to be connected and feel welcome no matter where they live in the country. They don't want to be disadvantaged if they live in the far north where it is very difficult to participate. We heard that nurses want CNA to look like the population of nurses in the country. And they also want us to look like the individuals that we care for. Very much diversity was a factor in those conversations. And I would say the last thing that we heard was that they want CNA to really play a role pulling the nursing perspectives together in a unified voice when topics are of significance and interest to us all.
Thank you, Tim. I think that's an excellent summary. And if 30% of the folks that are online actually were part of those conversations, please type into the chat line and the chat box your impressions of those sessions. Some of mine were nurses did not hold back. They were really forthcoming, sometimes apologized for what they were going to say and then said it. And another thing that really struck me was the licensed practical nurses or registered practical nurses in Ontario, and the registered psychiatric nurses said very clearly to us, you don't know us, CNA, you don't know us, you need to get to know us, you need to engage with us and work with us so that you know, we can make an active choice to be a member and to be a part of the association. But Tim, they also they had a few solutions to some of those things that you spoke about, like put out a paper, work with the CFNU and with the regulators across the country to put out a sort of fact sheet about the different pillars or the different swim lanes in there, and also perhaps the role of CAUSN, the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing. They also said, be boastful, say what you do, tell us what you're doing, tell us what the good work is that you're doing, or ask others to make sure that that's out there. They also talked about that two-way, and I think you talked about that a little bit, or two-way or multiple way of being not just CNA out, but also back in. And, you know, we had an incredible opportunity as a board and as a set of officers and as a staff during COVID-19 to really try to work to engage, and including these conversations today. So thanks for that. So Elizabeth, I'll ask you to put up that next slide. And this was a slide that we actually used in the consultation and in the engagement and dialogue sessions. And we actually asked it towards the end. We talked about the brand, and then we asked this towards the end. And the survey that we're putting out is actually trying to follow on this. So what would you value? I mean, many people said to us, you need a strong value proposition. You need a strong, to engage members, especially in areas where they really have not thought about whether they're a member or how to become a member or what being a member of CNA means. So how would, you know, what would you value from being a member of a national nursing, professional nursing association? And then how might we attract regulated nurses who are not yet members? And so, so if we put sort of back up that poll there, Elizabeth, and then we have another poll for this, is, you know, this was, this list here and these percentages, in some ways, Tim did reflect what we heard out there. You need to advocate. You need to be aggressive in your advocacy work, whether that's policy briefs, position statements. And, you know, over the last few months, there's been so much coming at us that really having those solid positions and solid statements has been really, really helpful. The nurses really appreciated the professional development. Sometimes they didn't know what was available. Many times they didn't know what was available. Certification program was something that they really, really appreciated. The Canadian Academy of Nursing is something that's new, just launching right now in the past year. So you can see that on this poll, 20% would know about that or value that. The frameworks, the publications, for example, the Advanced Practice Nursing Framework, the journal was very popular, and during the last year it has become fully online and a really, really excellent resource. And membership discounts, or all of them. So we do have another poll. Elizabeth, I'll ask you to put up that poll. And then Tim, maybe while Elizabeth has that poll up, we could maybe speak to some of the other perspectives that we heard relative to these two questions.
Yeah, sure, Claire. When I sit back and recall the many sessions that I went to, you know, there was really three kind of key things that I can recall, you know, us hearing. And the first ones were nurses valued the ability to be part of a national association and a national community, and that being connected and having a national voice was really important to them. We heard that a fair amount when we were out. They value education. And particularly, we heard, as the poll said, a lot about the certification program. And some of what we heard is they want more of them. And I would say that one of the other things that we heard, particularly when it came to education and professional development, was a real need for that for nurses that are working in northern and isolated communities. They really wanted us to provide educational options for them that they could participate in remotely. And the last thing I would say is that they really wanted and saw CNA as an entity that could unite us all in a common cause and in a common message.
Thank you, Tim. So there you go. So there, how familiar are even these folks that found today, there's 120 of you online here, that found your way to this Coffee with Claire today. You know, 36%, so a good solid third of you really just somewhat familiar with the work of the Canadian Nurses Association. So, you know, when they told us to be boastful and to speak about the work that we do and the impact of that work, I think that was really, really good advice. I think, Tim, you summarized that really well, and, you know, some of the early career nurses and certainly our students and student leaders told us that they really valued being part of something bigger, something national, and also connected to the international. And actually, Tim and I left the International Council of Nurses sessions this morning. They call it the NNA, so the National Nursing Associations. And we had an opportunity this morning, I had an opportunity to speak and to have an intervention, as they call it. And I spoke about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact in Canada on our long-term care facilities. And, you know, CNA wrote a very solid paper on that and is working hard along with our collaborators, you know, along with our partners to influence change, sweeping change really in the long-term care sector. And I think it was Linda Silas in one of the sessions that she was at, or the session that she was at, she said that, you know, CNA can be a convener, kind of a UN of nursing. So that unifying, that pulling together, where CNA doesn't have to feel like they've got the solutions, but can convene and pull people together. And we've seen a lot of that happening during COVID-19 again, and during the pandemic. So thanks, Tim. So if you've got questions, if you've got comments, please please use the chat box, and please use the Q&A box to ask them. Okay, so I'm going to move now to the brand, to CNA's brand, because while we were talking to nurses about what they value, did they know CNA, and those kinds of things, we actually went out to as part of a branding exercise. And the reason we embarked on the branding exercise was because of that membership change. And when we reflected and looked at our organization, said, do we actually have a brand that's inclusive, that it reflects the membership, reflects all the different categories of nurses, that actually can take us into the future and can really give us direction and some and good solid foundation. So before I move on, I'm just going to share what I shared in what we shared in those sessions, and things that we learned about branding, the process of branding. The branding is not just a logo, and actually very little, if any, of our conversations in those 50 meetings was about the name of the organization or about our logo. But that a brand and the branding process is built around the values to make connections both on an emotional, but also on a rational and intellectual level. And we certainly saw that in those sessions as we were out there. And really that a brand is how an organization, so how the Canadian Nurses Association would be seen through the eyes of others. And I think Mike Villeneuve, our CEO, says, well, what people are saying about you when you're not in the room. And a brand is really important to describe or to define the unique and meaningful qualities to your partners, and being able to communicate them in a consistent and an active and meaningful way with the partners. So that's what branding is as we understand it. And so a big part of when these engagement and dialogue meetings was around branding. So the next slide, Elizabeth, is, thank you. What we heard loud and clear is that members want their, and CNA, their Canadian Nurses Association, to be inclusive, to be diverse in all of those dimensions of diverse, and influential, being able to influence, persuade, and create change. And to showcase the knowledge, the competence, and the skill of its members. And we heard that in every one of those 50 sessions. And for those of you who were there, there was the word compassion and caring in the member insight, the membership insight that we brought out into these engagement and dialogue sessions. And people said, well, that's important and foundational and the core of what it means to be a nurse and nursing. That knowledge, that competence, and that skill, the evidence, was really, really important. So our brand must, absolutely must reflect these elements. So we're going to share in the next slide the membership insight, the new one that actually, after all of the findings and all of the notes and the recordings of the sessions were compiled, a company called Venture Communications out of Calgary helped us, and our board put together this new membership insight. And I'm going to ask Tim to read it in a second, but we really hope that just like in our sessions out there, our in-person sessions, that you'll react to this. As I said, a brand, you react at an emotional, but also at an intellectual level. We hope you'll see change, but we also hope that you'll continue to give us feedback in the chat box. So Tim, I'm going to ask you to read the new membership insight for our brand.
Thanks, Claire. So just before I do, I think I wanted to kind of add a couple of points to that. You know, I think when we went out with the first kind of draft of the member insight, Claire kind of alluded to it, but we really asked for an honest and frank response to what we presented. And I agree with Claire. We got it, and we got it viscerally. And I think nurses were very honest. Like Claire said a bit ago, they would sometimes apologize for what they were going to say before they did. But we thoroughly enjoyed and got huge value out of everything that everyone said. There was never a time that we actually felt like we came out of a session bruised and beaten up. What we heard in the first session, it was largely out of date and it was old talk. We heard that, we heard loud and clear you want something different, that it needed to reflect a very different reality of what individuals saw their nursing profession to be. And like Claire said, knowledge was just a key point. And so what we've come to for the 30% of you that have been on one of those sessions, we really want you to also react to this like you did the first time around, and hopefully you feel like we did what you told us justice. And what it says is that regulated nurses require a national association that advances the profession in Canada and internationally. They want a collaborative network that empowers a diverse community of regulated nurses to individually excel in their practices, as well as a platform to elevate their voices and collectively advance evidence-informed policy solutions for the betterment of all.
Okay, so we're going to not open the microphones, but we definitely are opening the chat box. And if you've got comments, I wanted to recognize, I did see one comment from Lynn Power about board structure, because I did mention, you know, the governance review. We are in the process of that. There is by August, we should have some really solid ideas. We are back out talking to folks around the board structure, around governance, around membership and membership models, and those kinds of things. So there will be, I think, big changes as we move ahead. But we got to get it right, and we need to do it engaged with our members and with those that are part of the Canadian Nurses Association. So great question, Lynn. And we are working on that. And I would say tuned for later in the summer. And I'm really proud of CNA and the board and the officers, even though COVID-19 pandemic was here, we continued to advance some of that core essential work of the development of the organization, although a little setback in our timelines, but really not too bad. So great point, Lynn, and keep asking it. I'm just going to read some of them, especially from those of you that were there. So Sarah, Lancashire, and then Tim, maybe you can pick out a couple to read. So Sarah was with us at a number of them, actually. So she's saying it's really improved from the original. Love the first sentence. So regulated nurses require a national association that advances the profession in Canada and internationally. And that is certainly something that we heard, and I've lost Sarah, and that it's really improved from the first one that was there. So Tim, do you have one? And then Josette, I might ask you to read one of the ones that's in French. Tim?
Yeah, 2 points, Claire. There was a comment that I believe Marianne put in related to the betterment of all, and if it was referring to nurses or the health of Canadians or both, and I would say it's both. The other thing that there was a comment that Sylvain put in related to a youth committee, and certainly one of the things that we heard when we were out, particularly with novice nurses that were recently into the profession, and we also heard it in spades with the Canadian Student Nurses Association, is they really have this sensation that once they hit the workplace, that there's a bit of a gap that engages them to participate because they no longer are learners. They're full members of the profession, yet at times they feel like they're minimized because they don't have a lot of experience, yet some of them have done amazing leadership work as students, that they don't feel they've got an avenue to participate, and in some ways they feel like they're left out. And so not sure what the answer to that is, but we heard that a lot, and I think it's something that we need to do something with.
Thanks. Josette, do you want to read one of the ones that was written in French?
I don't see it in the chat box, Claire, or in the Q&A. I don't see it in the chat box.
Okay, maybe people are introducing themselves. So
yeah, it's introductions. Okay. Yeah, thank you, but I'm monitoring.
Okay, so Lisa Ashley, you ask a really interesting question that inclusivity is different than diversity, and absolutely. So that's a great piece of feedback. And as you heard in the slide before, the nurses that we talk to, the regulated nurses that we talk to, want an inclusive and a diverse CNA. So that's a great piece of feedback and one that we'll take back to this. Okay, so I see there's comments in there, and there's some, so just keep reacting and talking to us. Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll move on from this membership insight to the rest of, or the part of the brand. Okay, so this is called a brand map, and this is how Venture Communications helps organizations such as the Canadian Nurses Association build their brand. And they see it as a set, as it's illustrated here, of concentric circles that moves out from that core, which they call the DNA, to the vision of the organization, of the organization's brand, the promise the message and the personality. And we just want to share with you the first two, the DNA and the vision. And then we'll talk about sort of next steps after that. So the next slide then, Elizabeth, please. So this is the DNA and the vision, and I'm going to ask Tim to read it in a minute and also to speak to it, to what it means. But just before he does, I really wanted to share with you that we have taken this to our board a number of times, our board of directors, and we have taken it also to what is called the Oversight Committee, which had former board on it. It has members of the nursing, the Network of Nursing Specialists, but most importantly, it has membership of the licensed practical nurses and registered practical nurses and registered psychiatric nurses. We do have 2 registered psychiatric nurses on our board, but didn't want to rely on that for that diverse and inclusive representation and feedback. So we have taken it to our Oversight Committee and also to our Board of Directors, and we'll actually be talking about it again tomorrow at our board meeting. So just wanted to mention that. So Tim, I'm going to ask you to read the DNA and the vision, and maybe first speak to what do we understand the DNA to be of a brand, and then what do we understand the vision of a brand to be.
Thanks, Claire. It's taken a little bit of time for us to kind of wrap our heads around this, so I could imagine it probably will for you. So when we talk DNA, really what we're talking about is the distillation of the brand's genetic code into a clear thought. And Venture took a lot of the information that we put together. We took a lot of notes when we went around the country and when we've spoken to different groups. And they synthesized the feedback into a DNA of answering the call. And kind of examples of that, just to kind of give you a sense of what we're talking about is, and I'll use a couple of examples to illustrate. Nurses during the pandemic answered the call by being reassigned and working in places that they needed to. Nurses came out of retirement in order to help and really did what they needed to do. And as Linda would very eloquently point out, at times that were less than ideal environments to do it. From an organizational perspective, CNA's paper that Claire spoke about long-term care was an example about answering the call to speak to an issue in the healthcare system that was of significant importance. She also spent a fair amount of time speaking with federal ministers of seniors and health about issues that were important to nurses, particularly about access to PPE early on in the pandemic. And I have to say, today she did a fantastic job pulling the Band-Aid off and really speaking very eloquently about the long-term care problem that we unfortunately are leading the world in, that we need to do something about. Vision is about how we perform in an exceptional way. When we went out and spoke with nurses, really what we heard is that nurses want CNA to aggressively advocate for the nursing profession as part of the vision. We heard that they want CNA to help the profession improve their skills to advance their careers, and that we heard that nurses want a strong cross-Canada network that will entice people to become nurses, and that it will help the profession to be accessible to anyone who wants to be a nurse, but that it'll also help us look like the people that we care for. We heard that nurses want a network that would enable our voice to come out as one. And we also heard that nurses want an association that helps them to be encouraged to speak up locally and share their views locally. We heard that nurses want CNA to encourage and welcome them to contribute when they feel there's an issue that is of importance to them. And so ultimately the DA and vision they're inward, and these are the fuel that propels us to action. It's kind of the fire in our belly, as an analogy, that really pushes us in how we respond and how we act when circumstances come up.
Okay, excellent summary, Tim. And there was an enormous amount of information that this group took from these sessions and really distilled it down to this DNA and to this vision. So I'm wondering if you've got some comments on this as an audience, if you've got some questions. So there is a question here from an anonymous attendee. It says, was there discussion around service? And where is interprofessional competencies and team work in here? And what exactly does betterment of all mean? And it's really, that's really interesting, because that betterment of all, it started out by saying for Canadians, but I think even in the recent months, we've realized again that, you know, many of, when you say Canadians, that is an exclusive group. There is a number of people who live in Canada who are not Canadians, who are part of our society and part of the people who we care for and care about. And there are some people within Canada who don't consider that as their citizenship. So we were looking to be very inclusive and respectful. And so we were saying people who live in Canada. And I think that betterment of all, or health of all, was something that just seemed to be the most inclusive. So that's what that means. And the other question here is, what about service of populations and health promotion? So I think in the brand and in CNA's work, it isn't only about the acute care sector, of course. It's about that broad health system and those many parts of the health system, right from promotion of health at a population level to care for someone in the last days of their lives. So it was meant to be broad and inclusive of all of those domains of practice and all of those aspects of practice. Tim, do you have anything you want to? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think the one other thing that came out in the sessions is certainly there was a propensity for individuals to want to look internal within our borders. And you know, some of what we heard is we got to fix our house before we fix or help someone else fix theirs. But the one thing that came out in the sessions is we actually do, as Canadian nurses, we're seen very much in the world as being very, very well educated and trained, and are strong practitioners, and we work all over the globe. And we have members working all over the globe. And we really wanted to make sure that they felt included in what we came out. And so that's kind of where some of the international flair comes.
Yes, thank you for that. And that respect internationally is both for practice, but also for our education system, also for our regulation, and also for our unions and the advocacy that they do so well. So that is a really strong reputation, and just having some opportunity to be at a couple of events that ICN and also the Chinese Nurses Association, I was actually very humbled by the respect and the admiration for Canadian nurses and Canadian nursing. And when you think that the Chinese Nurses Association have 5 million members, the American Nurses Association have the potential of 4 million in their country. And, you know, we have the potential of 430,000. We do really punch above our weight, I think, in the international area. But yes, so anything else, Tim, you want to add, or should we look at the questions here? One is, what is CNA doing to engage and attract new grads? How about a discounted membership for year one post-grad? I think, Tim, you should answer that question. You have some good ideas about that and some good vision.
Yeah, so we've certainly had a fair amount of conversation with students. When Claire and Mike and I went to the CNSA conference in Montreal in January, they made sure they came and spoke their truth to us and what they felt. And so we're actually in conversations with CNSA to work out a memorandum of agreement or understanding as to how we can come up with an easy way for them to be members that we hope to be able to announce very, very soon. And so I'm really excited about the potential of those students being engaged and active members of our association right early on when they start nursing school, so that they're connected and can participate. So a really good question, and we're actively working on the solution for that.
For, you know, they were there in spades at the Canadian Nursing Students Association in Montreal, and as we did the engagement and dialogue, they were actually lined up, I think, 10 deep at the microphones. And, you know, I had to reflect and say, I'm not so sure that I could have articulated what I was thinking in that way at that stage of my career. So we were incredibly impressed with the caliber of leaders in that group. And they, again, some of them thought they were members, as by virtue of being a member of the Canadian Nursing Students Association. They actually also thought they were a member of the Canadian Nurses Association. So there's some clarification there. And as you said, Tim, we're actively working on that. But I also, go ahead.
They also sent us some papers.
They
sent us papers providing us a lot of recommendations as to how we can improve some things.
Yeah, they did, and they're very, very well, very well written and very thoughtful. And we stayed for pretty much the whole conference and their meetings, and participated and really got I think a good sense of the Canadian Nursing Students Association through those days in Montreal. One, though, in this question by Nancy, she talks about not just students, but she also talks about new graduates or early career nurses. And, you know, many in the engagement and dialogue sessions were early career, and again spoke up and really encouraged the Canadian Nurses Association to think of ways to engage, but not just as a special group, although to have some special attention on that group of emerging leaders or leaders, early career nurses, but also to figure out how to connect them with you know, some of the nurses that are in specialty areas or working in places that they feel very, and I'm going to use the word, called to work. Some of them came to nursing with a very particular vision of where they wanted to work and to serve and to be part of the work with very particular populations, sometimes very hard to reach, marginalized, vulnerable populations. And so how could they connect up and either form mentorship kinds of relationships or learn or engage in conversations and dialogues with them? So I think it's a multifaceted perspective, but it's a group that we heard loud and clear that we needed to focus on and to be very, very intentional about and continue to engage with. And they had many really good ideas and solutions for us. So is there if there's other questions there, but I might suggest that we move on. And if you have a question, please ask it, and we'll do our best to either answer it today or as we move on through this process. So the next slide, Elizabeth, please. So this was our commitment. This is what we said in the engagement sessions, and it stands today. And given that these are my very last few days as the president of the Canadian Nurses Association, I offered last night for Tim to read this, but he said that I should, so I'm going to. So we commit, myself and Tim and the officers, the board of directors, the staff at CNA, to continue to listen to and hear the voices and advice of current as well as future and potential members. We will continue to engage broadly. I think that's part of being an inclusive organization, and one that can be that convener or that UN of nursing. So we commit to engaging broadly and hope that you'll hold us accountable to that as we build an inclusive Canadian Nurses Association. We commit to keep you informed. This is the 10th, and this is my final conversation or coffee with Claire. But we've had some really, really solid feedback about these kind of forums. And Tim and I talked last night about a few visions. So maybe it's tea with Tim or tequila with Tim, or maybe it just continues to be coffee with Tim. So stay tuned and stay tuned for more of that. And our commitment is that together, as the first slide said, your voice, your association, together to build a strong, vibrant, relevant, engaging, forward-leaning, courageous, and effective professional nurses association, of which all nurses can feel proud and feel energized. So that's our commitment. That remains our commitment. That remains the board and the organization's commitment. And we're hoping that you will really stay with us and consider the journey forward. It really is very exciting, and there's just huge possibilities within it. So our next steps is that in June, we're not quite finished with June, but that we did engage with the Oversight Committee. We will do that again. We did have a special board meeting to provide further direction to Venture Communications and to the staff at CNA on further the branding in terms of the look at perhaps a new logo, perhaps some creative material, and some of it is really, really exciting. And so you'll see that coming over the next few months, but we wanted to do the survey. So we're going to launch that member survey. It's just tweaking the translation, so it should be up in the next couple of days. In July, really looking at the creative communications and what Venture will bring back to us, looking at the member survey analysis, and then in the fall time, launching the new CNA brand. And in some of that, we really want, and those who are licensed practical nurses, registered practical nurses, and registered psychiatric nurses online, we really do want to hear from you and do really want to engage with you as we move through that process. And the next slide just shows you what the link to the survey will look like. That'll come in a few days, and look for that, and please push it out and push it out to those that maybe haven't had this opportunity and didn't have the opportunity in those engagement sessions. And the next slide just says thank you, and then I think we'll take the slides off, and it'll just be Tim and myself and the staff here, and we're just about at time. And I don't see any more comments, Tim, or really there's some supportive comments here. And I'm going to give you, as the incoming president on Monday, the last word, but I just wanted to share, I did do a Facebook post, and I just actually, for those of you who've read it and commented, thank you so much, but I actually just wanted to finish today by reading it again, because it does really come from my heart. It has been truly an incredible privilege to be the president-elect and the president of the Canadian Nurses Association, and I thank you for that opportunity. So to my colleagues, the Nurses of Canada, I thank you. And as I reflect on how fortunate I am to have had this opportunity, really during these really unprecedented times over the last number of months and weeks. Never have I been more proud to say I am a nurse. The COVID-19 pandemic, and we heard that internationally today in the meetings right before this session, has challenged the healthcare system around the world and us as individuals, as family and community members, and as nurses. But despite those challenges, nurses, all of you, have continued to show up willing and ready to take care of the public. And I want to express really my heartfelt gratitude for the dedication, but also for the leadership, the knowledge, the skill, and the caring that you brought and that you continue to bring in that fight against COVID-19 pandemic that we are not finished with. So thank you so much, and I'll see you at the annual general meeting on Monday. Tim, final word.
So thanks, Claire. I just maybe a couple of things. I think the first thing that behooves me to say is that this has been an incredible 2 years. I couldn't have asked for someone to mentor me for Monday as much as you have. You have given a tremendous amount of your time, and working side by side with you for the last 2 years has been an incredible pleasure. And you have represented us admirably. You demonstrated it today on the call with ICN in such a professional way. I think nurses across the country would be so proud of how you presented that issue for them today. It was great to have the opportunity to watch it. I'm so excited about the next 2 years. This will not be the only time that you will have an opportunity to provide feedback and participate in the future of our organization. We together will build it, and we will change it the way that you told Claire and I you wanted it to be changed. And I certainly, we've heard a lot. People are very much enjoyed the coffees with Claire. And so I have to learn to be comfortable with coffees with something. And so certainly we'd really like to hear from you as to how you would like to see us go forward with these. We've heard a lot where people found them really helpful. And so as we determine a platform for the next 2 years, very much want your input. And Claire's built a beautiful, and so I look forward to it. And so let's know what you think.
Thanks, Tim. Somebody's saying they're guests with guest. So that's great. So
yeah, I was distracted by what
I know. Yeah. So thanks everybody. Thanks so much for being here today, and stay tuned, and please stay engaged with us, and have a great day and great weekend. Bye now.